tengo mein, Speak my sage, my linky.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a 14.5 pin and weld battle rifle thingy. This one here is, of course, chambered in the venerable 308. Now, 308 is unfortunately fairly expensive to shoot a lot of, and I have been shooting a lot of it. So, with that out of the way, the biggest three sponsors of the channel are, number one, going to be in my Subscribe Star guys, which I need to do a round of giveaways for those guys, but they directly financially support the channel. That's going to be the best way to support if you desire to do so. Number two is going to be Callaway Ballistics, because they fund a lot of the ammunition. By sending me ammo, you can use code FOCUS to save some money on shipping. And of course, Optics Planet, they send me gear to review. Again, you can use code FOCUS to save yourself some money. Now, getting into full disclosure on the 14.5 monstrosity that we have here, I believe I have a relationship with every single component manufacturer on this build, and this was actually the progenitor for the 14.5 308s that I sold on my website. You can't buy those, they won't be in stock until 2024, so this video is kind of just for the fun of it because I did enjoy shooting it quite a bit. I believe the only component manufacturer on the build that I don't have some sort of relationship with is Rearden, actually, though I am working on that for their dual port brake that I pin and welded to get this 14.5 to a legal 16-inch length. Now, getting into the parts list, starting out up front with the Rearden dual port brake, it's fairly effective as a muzzle brake. It doesn't have any sort of vertical compensation, so you do still get a good bit of muzzle rise with something like 308. Even though it is reducing that horizontal recoil, still not the best overall recoil reduction device. However, of course, it does double as a suppressor host for the Rearden Plan B system, which does work quite well. It is a little unfortunate on the Resonator K that it does have so much back pressure, which does cause some issues, which we'll get into a little bit later on. Now, half of the heart and soul of this build is the Ballistic Advantage 14.5 barrel. I've been bugging Ballistic Advantage to come out with a 13.7, 13.9, or 14.5 barrel, and the one that they eventually came out with for 308 is a 14.5 carbine length barrel, so it's not a mid-length, it's a carbine length barrel. I was of course hoping for a mid-length system, but beggars can't be choosers. Now, this specific barrel is 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel, 0.750 gas block journal. In terms of its profile, it is definitely a middleweight. It's a little bit heavier in the back, and then of course at the 0.750 gas block journal, it's basically a straight profile to the 5/8 by 24 threads. I believe this one has a 1 in 10 twist rate. Gas port size is around a 0.060, which you do not need a very large gas port size when we get into 6.5 Creed, 308, any sort of full power cartridge, because of course you do have a lot more powder in those cases, and you have a very long dwell time with a carbine length gas system on a 14.5-inch barrel, so the gas port size is very small. Now, at that very small gas port size, unsuppressed shooting is very well gassed right out of the box. You do not need any changes whatsoever if you are planning on running this unsuppressed. However, when you add a suppressor in, especially a higher back pressure can, that very short gas system length and just the nature of these 308 gas guns in an AR-10, you do need to do something to reduce the amount of gas coming back in the system to slow it down to make it, one, more reliable, but two, more pleasant to shoot as well, because getting a ton of gas back in the face when shooting suppressed is not the most enjoyable experience. Now, Ballistic Advantage does not dimple these barrels from the factory. Fortunately, I do, and I also apply Rockset to the gas block screws to make sure that they never come loose. Now, moving on to the rail, this is the Aero Precision Atlas R1. This is, of course, based off of their M5 platform, which is essentially their take on the AR-10. This is the full-length Picatinny version with M-LOK on the 3, 6, and 9, 12.7 inches, if I haven't mentioned that already. It also does have 2 QDs on either side made out of very thin aluminum, and they're not anti-rotation, so if that's something that you're looking for, you are going to have to add on an additional QD point for your sling. Now, the way that I have the rail set up currently is very simple. For a 14.5 quote-unquote battle rifle, I have a HRT AWLS light, which is a extremely high candela light, easily able to punch out beyond 100 yards if you really need it, which kind of goes with a 14.5 308. If you do need to go a little bit further in the dark with a white light, the HRT is a good way to go. I do always leave a Picatinny M-LOK section at the end of the rail just in case I ever need to quickly attach my bipod for more stable shooting, or if I ever want to take it out to distance. 14.5 308 is definitely something that can stretch out if you want to. Now, the rail wrap, this is the Grovtec rail wrap. Now, the reason it looks kind of janky on here right now is because I'm lazy and did not install it properly, and I swap it around to a bunch of different guns. They did send this one out to me. I've shot with them before. It does have a lot of different sections for cable management if you did need to do that. However, the ODA on the HRT ALS means that I don't really have any cables to manage, but it is nice and does keep my hands from the very hot barrel. In terms of the vertical foregrip or the angled foregrip, this is the BCM CAG, which is my favorite AFG. Now, while the Atlas R1 from Aero is aesthetically pleasing, it is kind of the bare minimum in terms of performance. I don't really like the lockup. That is one of the subpar things on basically all of the rails except for their enhanced series. The wedge taper lock system does work. I've never had it shift on me. However, it is a very, very small contact area. On the AR-10s, you also have to time the barrel nut, which is minorly annoying. And again, the taper lock system does work. I have had it lock up on my brother's rifle actually, and I had to drill it out. It's not the most robust. You definitely don't want to go beyond like 20 or 25 inch-pounds on it because it will lock up and you will strip it out. Because again, the system is just not all that robust, but again, I haven't had any issues with the rail actually shifting, and I have used a bunch of these, so throughout drop test, 308 recoil, and a bunch of other calibers as well, I've never had one shift, but I'm just not a big fan of the lockup. Now, moving on to the upper receiver itself, this is definitely one of the areas where I try to save the most money as a producer of this upper receiver. This is one of those billet upper receivers that you'll see floating around for the AR-10 platform. They are a little bit bulkier, a little bit heavier. They're also machined out of 6061 versus 7075. However, they are, again, quite a bit more bulky than some of the other upper receivers on the market, like the Aero M5 or name your favorite DPMS AR-10 style upper receiver. So in terms of strength, they may be on par, if a few ounces heavier because of all the extra material. Now, the BCG is the second half of the heart and soul, which does have something special going on with it, which we'll mention in just a minute. It is a completely nickel boron job, 9310 bolt, chamfered lugs, 8620 carrier, again completely coated in this beautiful nickel boron, which is a very slick, very robust coating, which is something you are going to need if you plan on doing a high volume of fire while suppressed, because 308s or really any large caliber gun when suppressed without a flow-through suppressor is going to dump a lot of carbon back into the BCG and will cause reliability issues if you're not taking care of your firearm. Now, the charging handle in this case, this is the Aero Precision Breach, which is a nice ambidextrous charging handle. It does have some gas busting characteristics as well, and for an ambidextrous, not terribly expensive charging handle, it works very well, and I have no complaints with it whatsoever. Now, as I mentioned earlier, on any large frame AR, if you're going to be shooting it suppressed, you probably want some sort of gas adjustment system. The way that I've gone about it on these upper receivers is with the Rubber City Armory adjustable gas key. Now, these are not the most popular solution out there in general. However, I have used these on a lot of different guns, a lot of different upper receiver lines as well. Personally, I've put anywhere from 10 to 12,000 rounds on these adjustable gas keys without issue. They're not necessarily quick adjust. They might be a little bit more annoying for the average person to install, but for somebody like me who does a bunch, I actually quite like it. So the gas key itself is incredibly high quality. I believe these are 4130 black nitride They are rounded at the back to reduce a little bit of wear and tear on the inside of your upper receiver, and the adjustment methodology we'll get into in just a minute. Now, as far as installation goes, I go to the mil-spec 40 inch-pounds on the carrier key screws. They are then set with rock set plus a gasket sealer in between the key and the carrier, and they are also staked by hand. Now, it's not necessarily the prettiest thing in the world, but it is, again, effective. Now, as far as adjusting the RCA adjustable gas key, this isn't something that you're going to want to adjust all the time. This is much more of a set and forget style. Now, in the kit, RCA supplies about 10 different little adjustment screws because you might lose one or two if you're doing it for the first time. I always set up mine the same way. I use a long screw that goes in first and then a second shorter screw that basically locks the first one into position. So I set the first one at my desired depth, which is going to vary greatly depending on what caliber. For instance, on 308, you can reduce a lot more of the gas than you might need to on a 5.56 that's already fairly well gassed. However, 308 suppressed, you're going to want to reduce as much of that gas as possible. So in this case, I go all the way down and then I believe a turn and a half back for suppress shooting, and then I use the shorter set screw to lock the first one in place. It is a very simple system. I have never had one of these lock up, and I've also never had one of them walk out of position after I've set them. So as far as function goes, they are not quick adjust, but they are definitely a durable set and forget system that works well enough for me. If you're looking for some sort of quick adjust system, there's the rifle speed gas block, which is nice, but about $230+, whereas these come in at a whopping $35. Now, as far as reliability on the system goes, the only legitimate issue that I had that wasn't caused by myself adjusting the gas too far one way or the other was a very weird fluke incident where when shooting on the trunk of my car sideways, I had a case eject and then bounce right back into the ejection port in between the bolt and the barrel, causing a failure to eject technically because it came out and then came right back in, but I'll let you guys categorize that how you want to. Now, getting into performance, as I had it set with the RCA adjustable gas key, it was ejecting unsuppressed at about 3:30 to 4 o'clock, which is basically turned down as much as I could when unsuppressed, and then when suppressed with the YHM Resonator K, which is a fairly high back pressure can. 308s are very sensitive to back pressure. Then it would eject at about 1:30 to 2 o'clock, so overgassed when suppressed and kind of undergassed when unsuppressed. Not necessarily the best of both worlds. Now, in the back, I am running a H3 buffer, or at least as heavy as a buffer as I can, with a 308 short buffer and then a 308 power spring as well. I'm sure there's probably a little bit different of a setup that I could go with to make it a little bit more forgiving in terms of suppressed versus unsuppressed, but that is part of the joy of shooting a DI 308. Now, when shooting unsuppressed, the way the gas is set in combination with the muzzle brake means that it is a very soft, quote-unquote soft recoiling gun for 308. Again, the brake is not the most effective brake on the market, but it's still very easy to control the recoil. When shooting suppressed, it's a little bit more punchy. You're getting the bolt velocity up there quite a bit, as you can tell by the ejection pattern. However, still not the worst gun to shoot. You can still shoot it quickly if you really want to. However, that's probably not the primary focus of something like this. Maybe you can shoot it quick in a pinch, but it's definitely going to be for that stopping power and the extended range capability that you're getting out of the 308 cartridge. Now, talking about accuracy, the BA barrel is fairly inexpensive, at least for 308 barrels, and the dealer price on these is fantastic. So I wasn't necessarily looking for MOA or sub MOA performance, especially out of more of a, I don't want to say duty style, but kind of a battle rifle. So looking for 2 to 3 MOA in general. The two match loads that I tested out of it, which was 168 grain Hornady Black and 168 grain Hornady AMAX. Most of my 308s do better with Federal Gold Medal Match, which is a Sierra Match King loading. However, I didn't have any of that on hand. However, with the two match loads that I did have on hand, I got anywhere between 1.5 MOA and 2 MOA 5-round groups, which is not fantastic. And again, I'd like to try other loads in this barrel, but that is what I got at the time. Now, it was still very, very easy to take out to 500 yards, and I'm certain 6, 7, and 800 yards would be fairly easy as well, though again, there are better calibers for the more long range side of things. Though again, the benefit of 308 is that it's relatively cheap, easy to find, and still very effective out to distance, especially when compared with something like 5.56. Now, with all of that out of the way, what would you actually use a 14.5-inch 308 for? Well, as I have it set up here with the SIG Romeo 8T Holosun HM3X magnifier, this is kind of a quote-unquote battle rifle setup, basically anything inside of about 400 yards. Of course, you can stretch a magnified red dot further, but it's just not what I consider to be ideal. If I'm going to be going beyond 400 yards, and especially consistently beyond 400 yards, I definitely like to have more magnification, 8 to 10x on the low end, and then if I'm going to be using it as more of a mid-range gun, because 14.5-inch 308 will go out to 1,000 yards. Realistically, it's going to be more ideal inside of 800 yards, but it's certainly capable of longer distances as well. If I'm going to be running it in a mid-range context, some sort of 2.5 to 15, as you see it here with the long-range setup, that is a 5 to 30. That is the Maven RS.4, which is a fantastic scope and probably a little bit overkill for a 14.5-inch 308. And if you did want to use this in more of a general purpose role, then a good LPVO, a 1 to 8, maybe a really good 1 to 10, or again, 2 to 12 with an offset dot, top-mounted dot, your optic setup of choice for that more general purpose role. Because again, 14.5 308 is extremely versatile. That's one of the nice things about 308 is it is a very versatile round. It will do just about anything you want it to do. It is going to be ballistically superior to 5.56, terminally superior to 5.56 as well. The downsides are pretty obvious. Just on the base rifle alone, you're giving up about a pound to a pound and a half. You're also going down by about 40% ammo capacity, and of course that ammo is heavier. You're also dealing with a more finicky system depending on how you're running it, and you're also of course dealing with more recoil, so on and so forth. And if you actually want to practice with the thing, train with it, get good with it at distance, understand how it performs in different conditions, you're going to be spending about double in terms of the ammo cost as well. So there are a lot of downsides to large frame ARs, especially for a single person. I think it works better if you're working with more than one person, but again, that's a totally different conversation that I'm not even equipped to talk about. But as far as actually using this one goes, for me, it is fun. 308 is a fun cartridge to use. It's very easy out to distance. It's a little bit silly up close if you want to run it quickly, but again, it can be done. So again, I really enjoy shooting the thing, but 14.5-inch 308 or really any sort of 308 roll is going to be much more niche than 5.56, which just does such a good job on so many different fronts for very little recoil, very little size and weight penalty, and of course you get a ton of cheap ammo to boot. Now, maybe a little bit more of a controversial take for me, but I really would never go longer than a 14.5-inch 308. Because as soon as I'm going longer than 14.5 inches, well, I'd rather just have 6.5 Creedmoor, deal with less recoil, and have a far ballistically superior round. 6.5 Creedmoor really is just better than 308 in just about every way, save a couple. And so for a high round count, quote-unquote battle rifle, I think 14.5 makes a lot of sense in 308. But if we're going to be going any longer than that in 308, again, I'd rather just use 6.5 Creedmoor. It's going to be way better at distance, way better in the wind, less recoil, so on and so forth. And the cost for ball ammunition, 6.5 Creed versus 308, is very, very similar. So again, there's really not that much of a cost argument either. So for me, 16-inch and longer 308 is kind of useless when 6.5 Creed again just does a much better job. For instance, the 18-inch 6.5 Creed that I built out will perform better than any barrel length of 308, and again you get a shorter, handier package that has less recoil to boot. So 6.5 Creed is definitely better as far as I go, but again, if you're going to be using extremely high round counts, you want a barrel that's not going to burn out quite as fast, there are some advantages to 308, and so I think the 14.5 308 concept works quite well. So there is the build in its entirety, my thoughts and opinions on just about all of it. It is a very fun gun to shoot, whether it's suppressed or unsuppressed. Very loud, very blasty. Of course, 14.5 308 can do just about anything with some penalties when it comes to size, weight, recoil, and the amount of ammunition that you can carry and the amount of ammunition you can actually fund. But with all that out of the way, guys, let me know what you guys think of the build in the comments down below. And with all that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. God bless.